The first rule of the ER was that chaos had a rhythm. Sarah Jenkins knew the beat by heart. It was a frantic percussion of beeping monitors, the squeak of worn gurney wheels, the clipped, urgent language of professionals who used syllables like currency they couldn't afford to waste. Tonight, the rhythm was a full-blown drum solo. "He's in VFib! Charging to 200! Clear!" Sarah's hands moved with an economy born of 1,000 similar nights. She slammed the button on the defibrillator, and the man on the table arched, a grotesque puppet pulled by an invisible string. His chest was a roadmap of bad decisions, a faded prison tattoo, wrestling for space with the puckered, angry scar of a previous bypass. For a moment, nothing. The flat line on the monitor was a screaming silence. "Come on," she muttered, her knuckles white on the paddles. "Come on, you old son of a bitch. You don't get to die on my shift." As if hearing her, a single blessed spike appeared on the screen, then another. A weak, thready rhythm returned. Sinus bradycardia. Not great, but it wasn't a flat line. It was a win. "Okay, let's push one of Epi and get him on a dopamine drip," she commanded, her voice cutting cleanly through the receding tide of panic. The resident, a young doctor with terror still wide in his eyes, nodded gratefully and began drawing up the meds. This was her world. A 10-hour ballet of controlled desperation at County General, a place where life and death were such frequent commuters they barely acknowledged each other in the hallway. Sarah navigated it with a kind of weary grace. At 34, her face was beginning to hold a permanent record of long nights and short tempers, but her eyes, a clear, steady blue, retained an empathy that the job had failed to grind out of her. An hour later, the old man was stabilized and shipped up to the ICU. The ER's rhythm settled into its more familiar tempo. Sarah was cleaning a cut on the forehead of a 6-year-old boy who had lost a fight with a coffee table. "You're being very brave, you know," she said, her voice soft. She'd stuck a cartoon dinosaur sticker on her scrubs, a battle-tested tool for disarming smaller patients. "This is going to sting just a little bit, like a tiny ant bite." The boy's lip trembled. "A big ant? Nope, a very, very small one. A baby ant. He doesn't even know how to bite properly yet." He managed a watery giggle as she applied the butterfly bandage with a practiced flick of her wrist. "All done. See? You're a superhero." As the boy's mother thanked her profusely, Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at the screen. Lily? She ducked into an alcove, the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. "Hey, Lil. Everything okay?" "Yeah. Fine. Mostly." Her sister's voice came through, thin and reedy. Sarah, I'm down to my last 2 doses of the Onbrel. Did the pre-auth go through?" Sarah closed her eyes, leaning her head back against the cool wall. The medication. The damn $1,600 a month medication that kept her sister's rheumatoid arthritis from welding her joints into immovable knots of pain. "Still fighting with them," Sarah said, forcing a calm she didn't feel. "They're saying Dr. Miller didn't code the renewal form correctly. I'll call them again on my break. Don't worry, okay? I'll handle it." "I know you will," Lily said. But the worry was a heavy blanket in her voice. "I just hate it." "Me too. Get some rest. I'll see you in the morning." She hung up, the weight of that conversation settling over her. This was the other rhythm of her life. The endless, grinding fight against insurance companies and pharmacies, a battle far more exhausting than any cardiac arrest. "Nurse Jenkins, we got a GSW coming in. 2 minutes out." Sarah pushed off the wall, the anxiety for Lily forced back into its box. There was no time for it here. She pulled on a fresh pair of gloves as the ambulance bay doors hissed open, revealing a gurney being wheeled in at a run. On it was a man, mid-40s, his face pale and slick with sweat. He was clutching his abdomen where a crimson stain was rapidly blooming on his shirt. John Doe. Beside him, jogging to keep up, was another man. He was in a rumpled jacket and jeans, but he moved with a tense, coiled energy that didn't belong to a concerned family member. His eyes weren't on the patient. They were scanning the ER, cataloging exits, faces, threats. This was Agent Mark Rylance, though Sarah didn't know it yet. To her, he was just another piece of the chaos. "What do we have?" she asked, her focus entirely on the man on the gurney. "Gunshot to the lower left quadrant, exit wound in the back. Vitals are crashing," the paramedic rattled off. Then the world shattered. The plate glass windows of the ER entrance didn't so much break as explode, disintegrating into a million glittering shards. The sound was a physical blow, a deafening crack of automatic gunfire that ripped through the air. Screams erupted. People dove for cover. The rhythm of the ER broke into a cacophony of pure terror. Sarah saw them through the skeletal frame of the doorway, two men in dark hoodies, raising weapons that looked brutally out of place in the sterile light of the hospital. Their target was obvious, the man on the gurney. Time seemed to warp, stretching and compressing. Agent Rylance was moving, reaching inside his jacket, his face a mask of grim determination. He was drawing a bead, preparing to make the ER a shooting gallery. But Sarah's instincts screamed a different imperative. Protect! She didn't think. She acted. With a strength she didn't know she had, she grabbed Rylance's arm, not to stop him, but to pull him down. Get down! She yelled, her voice nearly swallowed by the gunfire. She shoved him hard behind a heavy supply gurney, its steel frame offering a sliver of cover. A spray of bullets stitched across the wall where his head had been a second before, pulverizing drywall and sending a cloud of white dust into the air. He stumbled, and she saw a dark fleck of red appear on his shoulder shrapnel from the disintegrating wall. Without a second thought, she threw her own body in front of his, creating a second, softer barrier. She crouched over him, her back to the shooters, making herself a shield. The noise was deafening, the smell of cordite sharp and acrid. She could feel the percussive impact of bullets hitting the other side of the gurney, the metal groaning in protest. In the heart of the maelstrom, her training took over. "You're hit," she said, her voice a clinical anchor in the storm. She pressed her hand to his shoulder. "It's just a graze. Apply pressure, stay low, don't move." He stared up at her, his professional focus shattered by a raw, primal shock. This wasn't in his training manual. Civilians ran. They screamed. They didn't become human shields. The wail of approaching sirens grew from a distant cry to an overwhelming roar. The gunfire stopped as abruptly as it began. Sarah heard the squeal of tires outside, then an unearthly silence descended upon the ruined ER, broken only by the whimpers of the terrified and the incessant, ignored beeping of the monitors. She stayed down for a long moment, her heart hammering against her ribs. Then, slowly, she rose. The ER looked like a war zone. She took a deep breath, the adrenaline turning to ice in her veins. Pushing aside the gurney, she looked down at Rylance, then at the other victims scattered around the room. She was no longer a target. She was a nurse. "I need pressure bandages and 2 units of ONEG now," she shouted, her voice ringing with an authority that pulled others out of their shock. "You call a code silver. Lock this place down." Her eyes swept the room, triaging, assessing, commanding. It was only when the first police officers stormed in, weapons drawn, that she saw him. A short, balding man in a cheap suit with a sour, impatient look on his face. Detective Miller. He surveyed the scene, his gaze landing on her, not with relief or concern, but with pure, unadulterated annoyance. The system, in all its frustrating glory, had arrived. Sarah felt the first tremor in her hands, the delayed action shock beginning its assault. The long night was only just beginning. The next morning, the air in County General was thick with the ghosts of the previous night's violence. Plywood covered the shattered entrance, and the lingering scent of antiseptic couldn't quite mask the faint, coppery smell of old blood. Sarah walked through the hallways feeling disconnected, as if she were watching a movie of her own life. Every whisper, every sideways glance from a colleague felt directed at her. Some were looks of awe, others of pity. She preferred neither. She was just finishing her preliminary chart reviews when a crisp, sterile voice cut through the murmurs. "Nurse Jenkins, my office, now." It was Mr. Davies, the hospital administrator. He was a man assembled from a kit of bland corporate parts, muted tie, sensible haircut, a smile that never reached his eyes. He saw the hospital not as a place of healing, but as a business, and every patient was a potential entry on a profit and loss statement. In his office, which was tastefully decorated in shades of beige and disappointment, he gestured for her to sit. He remained standing, a classic power move. "Sarah," he began, his tone oozing a practiced, insincere sympathy. "First, let me say on behalf of the board, we are all relieved that you're unharmed. A truly harrowing ordeal. Thank you, Mr. Davies. However," he continued, the pivot so swift it could give you whiplash, "we need to discuss the significant breach of protocol that occurred." Sarah stared at him. "Breach of protocol? We were under fire, be that as it may," Davies said, steepling his fingers. "Your primary responsibility is to the safety of the unit as a whole. By engaging with the situation directly, by shielding that man, You not only put yourself in unacceptable danger, but you created a focal point of action that could have drawn fire towards other patients and staff. Standard procedure is to seek cover and await authorities. The condescension was a physical force, pressing down on her. He was critiquing her survival instincts from the safety of his leather chair. The rage, cold and sharp, began to smolder in her chest. He was an unarmed man about to be shot. I'm a nurse. My job is to preserve life. Your job, Nurse Jenkins, is to follow the hospital's guidelines. Davies corrected her smoothly. Our legal team and insurance carriers are going to have a field day with this. The liability you've exposed us to is staggering. Before Sarah could formulate a response that wouldn't get her immediately fired, Davies' intercom buzzed. Sir, security says there are some federal agents here to see you. And Nurse Jenkins, Davies' carefully constructed composure cracked. Federal agents? Moments later, the door opened, and the beige office was suddenly filled with an overwhelming presence. Two men in dark, immaculate suits entered first, their eyes doing a silent, efficient sweep of the room. They were followed by a taller, older man. His hair was silver, his face was etched with the kind of lines that come from making decisions that affect nations, and his suit was worth more than Sarah's car. He moved with an unhurried, absolute authority that made Davies shrink in his own office. Mr. Davies, the man said, his voice a low, resonant baritone. I'm Director Thompson of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I'm here to speak with Nurse Jenkins. Davies' jaw went slack. He looked from the director to Sarah and back again, his mind visibly struggling to recalibrate the power dynamic. Of course, Director. Please, he stammered, gesturing at his own chair. Thompson ignored him, his gaze fixed on Sarah. His eyes were a piercing gray, and in them she saw not a hint of condemnation, only a profound, almost weary respect. Nurse Jenkins, he said, extending a hand. On behalf of the United States government, I want to thank you. The man you saved is Special Agent Mark Rylance. He is a vital part of an operation to dismantle one of the largest trafficking rings on the East Coast. That operation, and Agent Rylance's life, would have been lost last night if not for you. The words were so direct, so laden with gravity, that they seemed to suck the air from the room. Sarah could only nod, momentarily speechless. Just then, the office door swung open again. Detective Miller stood there looking rumpled and furious. What the hell is this? Miller blurted out, his eyes on Thompson. This is a local police matter. My crime scene. Any interviews with witnesses go through me. Davies, seeing a chance to reassert some semblance of control, puffed out his chest. And, as hospital administrator, I must insist that any formal statement from my employee be made with our legal counsel present, for her protection and ours. The frustration was suffocating. These two men, buzzing around like angry gnats, were more concerned with their petty fiefdoms and liability waivers than the reality of what had happened. Director Thompson turned his head slowly, a motion that was somehow both minimal and immensely threatening. He looked at Davies, then at Miller. Mr. Davies, he said, his voice dropping to an icy calm, your hospital is a federal crime scene. Your legal counsel will be notified when I deem it appropriate. He then shifted his gaze to Miller. Detective, your jurisdiction ends where national security begins. You will stand down and offer my team your full cooperation, or I will make one phone call and have your badge, your pension, and your career prospects placed under federal review. Do I make myself clear? Miller's face went from red to a pasty white. He opened his mouth, then closed it, giving a jerky, resentful nod. Davies simply sank back into his chair, looking utterly neutered. The satisfaction that bloomed in Sarah's chest was sharp and sweet. Thompson turned back to Sarah, the frost in his voice melting away. I need your official statement, Nurse Jenkins. We believe you may have seen details that others missed. My agents have a secure room prepared, if you're willing. Yes, Sarah said, her voice clear and steady for the first time that day. I am. She stood up and walked out of the office with the director of the FBI, leaving Davies and Miller stewing in a beige room filled with their own impotent fury. In that moment, she felt a flicker of hope. She had done the right thing, and the highest authority in the land had just confirmed it. She had no idea how quickly the system she was a part of was about to turn on her, and how utterly alone she would soon become. The brief, empowering sense of vindication Sarah felt while walking with Director Thompson evaporated by the next afternoon. It was replaced by the cold, damp chill of institutional self-preservation. The first blow came, as she suspected it would, from Mr. Davies. She was summoned to his office again. This time, a woman from Human Resources was present, a sure sign that the conversation was going to be officially unpleasant. Sarah, Davies began, foregoing any pretense of sympathy. Following a preliminary review of last night's incident, and in light of the ongoing federal investigation, the board has decided to place you on paid administrative leave, effective immediately. Sarah felt the floor drop out from under her. Leave? Why? I didn't do anything wrong. It's not a punitive measure, the HR woman chirped, her voice having the forced cheerfulness of a recorded message. It's to ensure the integrity of the investigation and, frankly, for your own well-being. It's a chance for you to decompress after a traumatic event. It was a lie, and they all knew it. This wasn't about her well-being. It was about getting her out of the hospital. It was about isolating the problem. Davies's face confirmed it. The fact is, your presence is a disruption, he said, his tone flat. Staff are talking, the media has been calling, and we need to control the narrative. You will be required to turn in your ID badge and any hospital property. You are not to have contact with any hospital staff regarding this matter. We will let you know when the internal review is complete. She was being exiled. She walked out of the hospital that had been the center of her life for 6 years, clutching a cardboard box with a coffee mug and a few personal effects. The looks from her former colleagues were a mixture of fear and pity. One of her friends, a nurse named Maria, started to approach her, but a sharp glance from a supervising nurse sent her scurrying back to her station. The message was clear. Sarah was contagious. The second blow came from Detective Miller. 2 days later, he called and demanded she come to the precinct for a formal interview. The interview room was a concrete box with a metal table and 2 chairs. It was designed for intimidation. Miller didn't even pretend to be pleasant. He slapped a thin file on the table and leaned forward, his expression sour. Let's go over this again. You pulled a man, a federal agent, into the line of fire. I pulled him out of the line of fire. I put myself between him and the bullets. And in doing so, you moved a key principle in an active crime scene. You compromised the scene's integrity. Who's to say your actions didn't change the shooter's plans? Maybe they were just there to send a message, but you escalated it by getting involved. The logic was so twisted, so purposefully obtuse, that it made Sarah's head spin. They came in with automatic weapons. They opened fire on a crowded ER. You think they were there to send a message? I'm the one asking the questions here, Nurse Jenkins, he snapped. Did you know Agent Rylance before that night? Have you ever had contact with him or any of his associates? No. I'd never seen him before in my life. He scribbled a note, a cynical smirk on his face. Right. The interrogation lasted for 2 hours. He picked apart her statement, questioned her memory, and floated insidious theories designed to paint her as reckless at best and complicit at worst. He wasn't investigating a crime. He was building a case to blame the FBI's intrusion on his turf on an unstable civilian witness. Sarah left the station feeling grimy, violated, and deeply, truly angry. The system wasn't just failing to help her, it was actively trying to hurt her. The third blow was quieter, but landed with the force of a sledgehammer. An email from the pharmacy. The pre-authorization for Lily's Enbrel had been officially denied due to a change in employment status reported by her insurance provider. Her paid leave, it turned out, came with a hidden cost: the immediate suspension of her health benefits. Sarah spent the next 4 hours on the phone, trapped in the automated hell of the insurance industry. She was transferred from department to department, forced to explain her situation to a series of detached, monotone voices who all gave her the same answer. I'm sorry, ma'am, but according to our records, your policy is inactive. You would have to pay the full price for the medication. The full price is $1,600. I can't afford that. You could explore our payment plan options, ma'am? The voice offered, utterly devoid of human empathy. She hung up, the phone shaking in her hand. She looked at her checking account online. After rent and bills, she had less than $1,000 to her name. Lily needed that medicine. The panic, cold and sharp, began to set in. This wasn't about justice or protocol anymore. This was about survival. That night, the fourth front opened. She was coming back from a dispiriting trip to the grocery store when she noticed it. A dark sedan, a generic model, parked across the street. The windows were tinted. 2 men were inside, just sitting there. An hour later, they were still there. Coincidence, she told herself. Paranoia. But then her phone rang. An unknown number. She answered. Silence. Not the silence of a deadline, but the charged silence of someone listening on the other end. She could hear faint breathing, "Hello?" she said, her voice trembling slightly. The line clicked dead. The next day, it became undeniable. A man in a Vipers gang hoodie, the same snake logo she'd seen on the news, bumped into her as she was leaving a coffee shop. It was too hard to be an accident. He was lean, wiry, with dead eyes. He leaned in close, his voice a low growl. "Saw you on TV. You see too much." He was gone before she could even react, melting back into the pedestrian traffic. The threat was no longer a phantom car or a silent call. It was real. It had a face. Her hands shaking, she called Detective Miller's desk. She explained everything. The car, the silent call, the man in the coffee shop. Miller's sigh was audible over the phone. "Nurse Jenkins, with all due respect, you've been through a trauma. It's very common to feel jumpy, to see threats where there aren't any. A car, a phone call, some punk in a hoodie. It's not evidence. There's nothing I can do. If you feel unsafe, I suggest you stay inside." He hung up. Sarah stood in her living room, the phone still pressed to her ear, a profound and terrifying sense of isolation washing over her. Her job was gone. The police refused to protect her. Her sister's health was in jeopardy. And out on the street, the men who had tried to kill a federal agent in a crowded hospital knew who she was, and they were closing in. The walls, which had seemed so strong just a few days ago, were now squeezing the very air from her lungs. The final hammer blow didn't come in a condescending meeting or a hostile interrogation room. It arrived in a crisp, business-sized envelope delivered by a certified mail carrier who needed her signature. It felt official. It felt final. Inside, on heavy hospital letterhead, was a single sheet of paper. It was a termination letter. Sarah's eyes scanned the jargon-laden paragraphs, but a few key phrases leaped out like vipers from the page. Following a thorough internal investigation, actions inconsistent with hospital safety protocols, a failure to adhere to the employee morals clause regarding public conduct, resulting in significant property damage and irreparable reputational harm. They had fired her. Not just suspended her, but fired her. Davies had used the morals clause, a vague, catch-all bit of legalese meant for doctors caught in scandals to sever her completely. He had successfully packaged her heroism as a liability and thrown it, and her, in the trash. There was no severance, no thanks for her years of service, just a cold, bureaucratic execution. Sarah let the letter slip from her fingers. It fluttered to the floor. She didn't feel sadness, not yet. That would come later. What she felt was a hollow, ringing void where her career used to be. She had poured her life into County General, sacrificed nights, weekends, and holidays. In the end, she was worth less to them than their insurance premium. The rage was so profound it felt like grief. She spent the day in a daze, the silence of her small apartment amplifying the roar of her anxieties. By evening, a dull headache had settled behind her eyes. Needing air, needing to feel something other than the four walls of her apartment closing in, she went down to her car. That's when she saw it. Her beat-up, but reliable 10-year-old sedan was parked under a flickering street lamp. And emblazoned across the driver's side door, rendered in sloppy, aggressive strokes of black spray paint, was the crude image of a coiled snake. A viper. Her breath hitched. This was different. The silent calls, the parked car, the whispered threat those could be dismissed by a cynic like Miller as paranoia. This was a physical violation, a brand. They weren't just watching her anymore. They were marking her. They were telling her they could touch her life whenever they wanted. And if they could get to her car, parked right outside her building, they could get to her. They could find out where Lily lived. The thought sent a jolt of pure, undiluted terror through her. This was it, rock bottom. She was unemployed, broke, and being actively hunted by a violent street gang, and the one person whose job it was to help her thought she was hysterical. The system had utterly and completely failed. She was alone. Sarah leaned against the cold metal of her vandalized car, the rough texture of the spray paint under her fingertips. She could run, pack a bag, grab Lily, and just disappear. But where would they go? With what money? And for how long could they look over their shoulders? No. Running was what they wanted. It was what Davies wanted, what Miller wanted, what the Vipers wanted. They wanted her to be a frightened victim who would quietly vanish. A different feeling began to push through the despair, not the hot rage of before, but a cold, hard resolve. They had taken her job. They had threatened her family. They had pushed her into a corner. And in doing so, they had left her with nothing left to lose. She walked back up to her apartment, her steps sure and steady. She ignored the termination letter on the floor. She walked past the stack of bills on her counter. She went to the small table by her couch where her purse lay. From a side pocket, she pulled out a business card. It was thick, expensive cardstock, the lettering crisp and embossed. Director, Jonathan Thompson. Federal Bureau of Investigation. She stared at the name. The one person who had looked at her not as a liability or a nuisance, but as an asset. He had thanked her. He had believed her. He was her last and only chance. Her hand was steady as she picked up her phone and dialed the private number on the card. He answered on the second ring, his voice calm and authoritative. Thompson. Sarah took a deep breath. She wasn't calling to beg for protection or to complain about her situation. She was done being a victim. She was calling to offer a weapon. Director Thompson, this is Sarah Jenkins, she said, her voice devoid of panic, imbued with a new, chilling clarity. The man they were trying to kill in the ER, the John Doe. I noticed something. A specific medical detail about his old injuries. I think I know how to make them come for him again, but this time on your terms. The meeting took place less than 12 hours later in a location that didn't officially exist, a sterile, soundproofed conference room in the basement of a downtown federal building. The coffee was strong and the mood was serious. Across a polished table sat Director Thompson and a recovering but resolute agent, Mark Rylance, his arm in a sling, his eyes sharp and focused. They didn't treat her like a civilian. They treated her like a specialist. The John Doe, his name is Nico Reyes, Thompson began, pushing a file across the table. He was the Viper's chief accountant. He decided to flip, to testify against their leadership in exchange for witness protection. They found out before we could pull him. When I was assessing his initial gunshot wound, Sarah explained, her voice steady, I had to cut away his shirt. I saw an old surgical scar on his upper chest. It was a specific type of closure, a subcuticular stitch with bioabsorbable adhesive. It's a technique used to minimize scarring, often in plastic surgery, but in this case, it was over the site of a clavicle repair. What was unusual was the slight puckering at the distal end. It suggests a reaction to an internal fixation plate, possibly a cobalt-chromium alloy. It's rare, but it can cause chronic, low-grade inflammation that requires periodic drainage and monitoring. Rylance and Thompson exchanged a look. This was beyond anything their own medical examiners had flagged. I'm betting his surgeon told him he'd need a follow-up, and that it had to be done by a specialist with the right equipment, Sarah continued, leaning forward. He wouldn't be able to get that treatment in a federal holding facility. The Vipers know his medical history. If you leak that Nico Reyes is being transported back to County General for an emergency orthopedic procedure that only that hospital is equipped to handle, they'll see it as their last, best chance to silence him. A slow smile spread across Rylance's face. It's a perfect bottleneck. They know the hospital's layout. They'll feel confident. And this time, Thompson added, his gray eyes fixed on Sarah, we'll be waiting for them. It's brilliant, Nurse Jenkins. He paused. But it would require your presence. You're the only one who can make the medical setup look convincing enough to fool anyone on the inside who might be on their payroll. It would be dangerous. They spray-painted my car and got me fired, Sarah said, her voice flat. My definition of dangerous has changed. I'll do it. The sting operation was a marvel of federal efficiency. The FBI descended on County General like a silent, well-armed storm. Sarah felt a grim satisfaction watching Mr. Davies's face turn a blotchy red as Director Thompson informed him that a wing of his hospital was being temporarily commandeered under the Patriot Act. When Detective Miller arrived, sirens blaring, to protest the federal intrusion, a steely-eyed agent presented him with a warrant that effectively barred the local PD from coming within 500 feet of the operation. Sarah was given a new set of scrubs and an FBI earpiece. She was no longer a pariah in these halls. She was a key player. She worked with the FBI team, directing them on how to set up the orthopedic suite to look authentic. She faked a complex patient chart for Nico Reyes, filling it with the precise medical terminology that would pass any cursory inspection. She coached the agent playing the role of the unconscious Reyes on how to mimic the specific breathing patterns of a patient under heavy sedation. Her expertise, once dismissed as a liability, was now the core of the entire operation. The hours ticked by. The tension in the sealed-off wing was a palpable thing. Sarah sat with Rylance in a makeshift command center, watching a bank of monitors displaying feeds from hidden cameras. Viper, 1 and 2 on the move, a voice crackled in her earpiece. Disguised as hospital orderlies, they've bypassed security in the East Corridor. Sarah's eyes darted to the screen. She saw 2 men pushing a laundry cart, "Wait," she whispered into her mic. "Tell the team to hold. Look at the way the man on the right is walking. His gait. He's favoring his left leg, but his body is listing to the right. He's carrying something heavy in that cart, and it's unbalancing him." "Confirm," Ryland said into his own mic. "Weapons are likely in the cart. Let them proceed to the choke point." And the two men entered the orthopedic wing, their confidence growing as they met no resistance. They were followed minutes later by a third man, the leader. Sarah recognized him instantly from the coffee shop, the man with the dead eyes. They converged on the designated operating room. As they raised their weapons to storm the room, the lights in the hallway went out, and emergency doors slammed shut, trapping them. FBI tactical teams materialized from adjoining rooms, weapons raised, red laser dots dancing on the gangsters' chests. "FBI, drop your weapons now!" Two of the men, shocked and overwhelmed, immediately complied. But the leader, the man from the coffee shop, was different. He spun around, grabbing a nearby decorative vase, ready to use it as a weapon or a shield. He was trapped, but he was still fighting. Before the agents could move in, Sarah's voice, calm and clear, came over a small loudspeaker they had placed in the hall. "That call is fracture on your right wrist," she said, her eyes locked on the monitor. "It was badly set. I can see the Malunian deformity from here. The way you're holding that vase, the angle of your grip, it must be causing excruciating pain in your ulnar nerve." The man froze. His head whipped around, searching for the source of the voice. He looked down at his own wrist, an expression of pure disbelief on his face. How could anyone know that? The momentary distraction, the psychological shock of being so clinically and accurately assessed, was all it took. In that split second of hesitation, the FBI team surged forward. He was disarmed and on the ground before he even had time to process what had happened. It was over. Not with a bang, but with a diagnosis. From the command center, Rylance looked at Sarah, a slow smile of pure admiration on his face. "You know," he said, "you would have made one hell of an agent." Sarah watched the monitors as the Vipers were cuffed and led away. She simply shook her head. "I'm not an agent," she said, a quiet sense of triumph warming her. "I'm a nurse." The press conference was held 2 days later on the steps of the J. Edgar Hoover Building in Washington, D.C. The flash of cameras was a blinding, strobing sea. Sarah stood beside Director Thompson, not in scrubs, but in a simple, dignified dress she'd bought that morning. She felt strangely calm. Thompson stood at the podium, a phalanx of microphones pointed at him like a strange metallic bouquet. He detailed the takedown of the Viper's entire leadership, calling it one of the most successful domestic sting operations in recent memory. Then, he turned and gestured to Sarah. "This victory would not have been possible," Thompson announced, his voice carrying over the clicks of the cameras, "without the courage and extraordinary expertise of a private citizen, Miss Sarah Jenkins, a registered nurse from County General Hospital." He recounted the entire story. He spoke of her initial heroism in the ER, her selfless act of shielding Agent Rylance. Then, his voice took on a harder edge. "Miss Jenkins displayed this courage despite receiving a shocking lack of support from her former employer, who chose to terminate her for her actions, and despite having her legitimate concerns dismissed by local law enforcement. When the system failed her, she did not falter. Instead, she used her unique medical knowledge to provide the critical intelligence that allowed the FBI to dismantle a violent criminal enterprise. She is a testament to the fact that heroism is not about following a protocol. It's about doing what is right, no matter the cost. It was a public vindication and a direct, devastating shot at Davies and Miller. Sarah didn't have to say a word. The director of the FBI had said it all for her. The narrative, once controlled by cowards and bureaucrats, was now hers. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for her antagonists. An investigative journalism piece, sparked by Thompson's comments, exposed the callous treatment Sarah had received from County General's administration. The hospital's board of directors, facing a PR nightmare and threats of walkouts from the nursing staff who hailed Sarah as a hero, swiftly fired Mr. Davies. He was last seen carrying a cardboard box out of the hospital, a perfect karmic echo of Sarah's own exit. Meanwhile, a quiet but firm suggestion from the Department of Justice led to a formal internal affairs investigation into Detective Miller's department. His mishandling of Sarah's case, his dismissal of her threats, and his jurisdictional ego were laid bare. He was demoted to desk duty, a humiliating end to a career built on cynical shortcuts. A week later, Sarah was back in the same federal building, this time in Director Thompson's spacious office overlooking the Washington Monument. Agent Rylance was there, his arm now in a simple sling. "The Department of Justice has authorized a civilian gallantry award for you, Miss Jenkins," Thompson said, sliding a folder across his desk. "It comes with a monetary prize. We felt this amount was appropriate compensation for lost wages and undue hardship." Sarah opened the folder. Inside was a check made out to her for $250,000. She stared at it, the numbers blurring through a sudden film of tears. It wasn't just money. It was security. It was Lily's medication for the next decade. It was freedom. "Furthermore," Rylance added, a genuine smile on his face, "we were all incredibly impressed with your analytical skills. The Bureau has a forensic medical analysis unit that works with agents on complex cases. It's mostly civilian consultants. We'd like to offer you a position. The pay is significantly better than your old job, and I can promise you, we value our people." The final scene of her ordeal was not one of high drama, but of quiet, simple joy. She was in a new, sunlit apartment, boxes still stacked in the corners. She was on the phone, looking out a clean window at a city skyline. "You're kidding," Lily's voice, stronger and filled with laughter, chirped from the speakerphone. "They really offered you a job as a medical spy?" Sarah laughed, a genuine, unburdened sound. "It's a forensic medical analyst, Lil. And yes, they did. Are you going to take it?" "I already did. My first day is Monday," Sarah said, picking up a framed photo of the two of them and placing it on a bookshelf. "And guess what? The new insurance kicked in. Your Enbrel is being delivered tomorrow on a 3-month auto refill." There was a soft sniffle from the other end of the line. "Sarah, thank you." "Hey," Sarah said, her voice soft. "That's my job. I'm a nurse. I take care of people." She ended the call and stood for a long moment, bathed in the afternoon sunday. She had faced down gunmen, bureaucrats, and the crushing indifference of the system. They had tried to break her, to label her a liability, to cast her aside. But they had failed. They failed to understand that her greatest strength wasn't a flaw to be managed by protocol. Her compassion, her instinct to protect, her fierce, unwavering expertise, that was never the problem. It was, and always had been, the solution.